Hi, this is Danny Doyle, and in addition to Fire Emblem, I sometimes play other games, and sometimes those other games are even Pokemon games. So this is going to be my rankings of the Pokemon games. I'm putting them in a tier list because tier lists get more attention than rankings. But similarly to my Fire Emblem rankings, I am at least intending to order them from the ones that I like the most to the ones that I like the least. Unlike the Fire Emblem list, I am going to be using these tiers as significant gaps because I do think that there are significant gaps in quality between some of the Pokemon titles and others. But disclaimer at the beginning, it's okay if you like different games than me. It's okay if you dislike the games that I like. These are just video games, and at the end of the day, these are just my opinions. My ranking is not something that I'm going to claim is objective, even for the ones that I like the most or the least. But this is how I feel about these games, and yeah, I can't really change which ones I enjoy and which ones I don't enjoy. I will talk about why I like or dislike specific titles when I get to each of them, and then I also have a tier for NA, have not played. I'm going to put all of the games I haven't played in here. I considered ranking, so there's a couple of games that I haven't played, but I haven't played because I know I wouldn't like them. And I considered ranking them just based on the fact that, like, I know I wouldn't like them just from what I've seen, but I decided just to put them all in NA, have not played, just to, dissuade any sort of, like, OMG, you can't dislike a game you haven't even given a chance sort of comments. Because I know some people get, like, really upset if someone knows that they won't like something, right? Anyway. Tiers, S through F. I've given them descriptions. My favorites, great to play, still kind of fun, I'd rather not. This tier will upset people, and defective products. And without any further ado, let's dive into it. So first we have Pokemon Red and Blue. And full disclosure, this was not only my first Pokemon game, but the first video game that I ever owned. I played Donkey Kong Country and Super Mario 3 and Super Mario World in my Nana's basement when we were, like, visiting with all the cousins. We would take turns playing those games, especially because they did have the two-player modes where you would, like, switch between Donkey and Diddy or Mario and Luigi. So this wasn't the first video game I ever played, but it was the first one I owned, or rather, it was one of two that I owned at the same time. The other one was this, Bugs Bunny adventure game. It was a really jank platformer where you had to go around collecting carrots and avoiding enemies. That's irrelevant. The main thing is I have a lot of nostalgia for these games, and that is going to influence my my answers. I can't ignore the fact that I have nostalgia for and enjoy these games. I think that they are absolutely lovely. So they are a glitch-filled, completely unbalanced mess, with a smattering of bizarro design choices. Like, look at the movesets of just pick a random Pokemon in the 151, and look at their moveset, and it is going to either be, like, all normal moves, and you're like, why does this Pokemon have all normal moves? Or it's going to be a smorgasbord of, like, really strong moves that there's no reason for them to learn. You know, like Tauros getting Blizzard, Snorlax getting Thunderbolt and Surf, I guess because it's fat, it floats or whatever. Looking at the type chart is really, really unbalanced. A lot of people say that that's an issue, but I think, so these games were designed with the single player in mind. Yes, there's a multiplayer battle system, and nowadays we have Smogon where people will, like, fight against each other in the OU and UU and whatnot. But there wasn't any official competitive Pokemon until Generation 4, which I do think is when Game Freak first started trying to, like, actually make balance a thing. They did add some stuff in Gens 2 and 3 that, like, speak to trying to balance things within a single-player context, but I don't think they were worried about making, for example, Poison not suck ass, because Poison sucks ass in Gen 1. Probably the worst type in Gen 1. And the reason for that is these games are designed as single-player RPGs, and they were designed with that in mind. There's a lot of really bad Pokemon that are commonly found on enemy trainers. Team Rocket uses things like Voltorb because those are mimics, Grimer because those are slimes, Zubat shows up a bunch in caves because it's bats. Like, these are common RPG enemies. And a lot of them are poison. Like, Voltorb's not poison, but a lot of the common enemies that you see are poison types. You know, coughing is, I think it's supposed to be like a smoke elemental type deal. They take inspiration from the other RPGs at the time and make really weak enemies for you to kill, while also your Pokemon are stronger than them because they're supposed to be like player character type things. That is why the rival is the final boss, and he doesn't have any of those. Well, he has Pidgeot, but he doesn't have any of those like specifically designed to be weak Pokemon, and that's because, you know, he's supposed to be the hardest one. So I don't think the fact that it's unbalanced is an issue. It is super glitchy, and I can understand people disliking the earlier gens because it's glitchy, or because like there is some early Game Boy jank just due to the fact it's running on a less powerful system. But I think the glitches are really charming. I think that the glitches, so first off, none of them are game breaking. The closest one you could say is like the 1 in 256 glitch, which means 100% accurate moves have a 1 in 256 chance of missing. But that's not game breaking. That's something that you will probably encounter during playthroughs. But it's not going to have a huge impact. Outside of, like, if you're Nuzlocking, and even then, these are easy games, so, like, oh no, I missed an attack and a Pokemon died, I just get another one. It's not going to matter if you miss a tackle or a surf or whatever. Well, tackle's not even 100% accurate. But it's not going to get in the way of your experiencing the game. Like, if that's the thing that killed your enjoyment, you weren't having a good time anyway, and you should probably play a different game. Overall, these are going in my favorites. Like, my nostalgia is definitely influencing this ranking, but I do think that they are just incredibly well-designed games. They laid down the fundamentals for the series, and there's a reason that the series has lasted so long, despite the fact that it kind of refuses to evolve from those fundamentals. I'm gonna scoot this down just because we freed up space to not have a third row. Yeah, I think that these are very, very well-designed games, and I do wish that modern Pokemon was not just trying to recapture the magic of Gen 1 and instead tried to explore other areas, but for the time, phenomenal. Now, Yellow is the third version. Technically the fourth, because Green was Japan exclusive, but, you know, the Japanese versions, Green and Blue, and the American versions, or I guess it was international, right? It wasn't just America. But Blue and Red, the international versions, like, they're very parallel to each other, to the point where, like, I don't count the Japanese Green as being something different from Red and Blue. There are differences, but it's mostly, like, bug fixes and stuff. Yellow is pretty fundamentally different. It's not trying to follow the anime. It takes some inspiration, like adding Jesse and James and having Pikachu as your starter, but for the most part, it's kind of its own thing. Like, it's a halfway between the Red and Blue story and the anime story. But there's no, like, you know, the SS and Sinks or various other, like, anime points of adventure. It does mostly follow this story with some additions. At the same time, it doesn't take the Emerald path where it tries to be the definitive version. It's very much doing something different. You get all three starters. You have Pikachu, but he can't evolve. But he has, like, the weird friendship mechanic that would later become, like, evergreen with everyone. There's no return, but his friendship does impact both the way that he interacts with you when you talk to him in the overworld, and also the, I think it's Squirtle you can only get. Either Squirtle or Bulbasaur you can only get, or Ivysaur, or not Ivysaur, Charmander. One of the three you can only get based on Pikachu's friendship. Comments tell me which one is it. I know one of them is based on getting Lieutenant Surge's badge, and one of them is based on, I think, Brock's badge, and then one of them is Pikachu's friendship. But it's really, so I have nostalgia for this as well, but not for, like, the reason of having played it a bunch. The only time I played it was with my friend, Brendan, who had a Japanese copy of it before it was out internationally. His dad had gone on a business trip to Japan, and got him a Japanese copy of Pokemon Yellow. So the two of us would like huddle over his little Game Boy Color tiny screen, trying to figure out like what moves were what, because we couldn't read Japanese. And like, oh, this is a really strong one. This is a really, and I think we just basically soloed with our Pikachu, which meant anytime we ran into a ground type Pokemon, we were like, holy shit, like this Pokemon is way stronger than it was in Red and Blue, but that's because we were idiots and we didn't know it was just immune to electric type. So like Giovanni was so fucking hard for us because we were just spamming Thunderbolt against his Rhydon, like dumb idiots. We never made it out of Silph-Co. I don't know how we beat Giovanni in the game corner. I guess he doesn't have that many ground types, but we did not make it out of Silph-Co. I know that much. Actually, I don't think we made it to Giovanni. I think we were just bashing our head against Gary in Silph-Co. Anyway, I do think that a lot of what it adds is really cute, but I have a lesser... I feel like I have a lesser experience with it than playing Red and Blue, and part of that is I just don't have the same type of nostalgia for it. I don't think it can go any lower than A tier, because it does still have those same fundamentals. It is... I guess I should clarify, like, because they were the first games to do the formula that we have in basically every Pokemon game now, I'm giving them credit for that, because they invented it, right? Whereas, like, later, when I get to some later generations, I'm going to criticize them for failing to evolve and just sort of copying the work of Red, Blue, Yellow. And the reason that I think that that is a valid criticism is I personally think that sequels should always, and remakes to an extent, should always try to improve over the thing that they are a sequel or remake to. I think, you know, it shouldn't be like a FIFA situation where it's just the same game getting released over and over and over for another $60 price tag. And so if some of that feels inconsistent, that is the logic that I have for ranking these games the way that they are. You're welcome to disagree with that, and your rankings would be different than mine, but I personally think that these fundamentals, like, they invented the wheel, and it's awesome. There's a reason that Pokemon captures so many people's hearts. And I think that Pikachu's friendship speaks to another part of that, because it's not really a game mechanic thing. It's just making you love these critters. And that's a big part of it. Alright, next up is Gold and Silver. And Johto is probably my least favorite of the regions. I think it's just structured really, really poorly. I know it's kind of passé, cliche, whatever you want to say, to criticize the Generation 2 level curve these days, but like, a lot of people do it because it's a big problem. Like, just because something is a popular criticism doesn't mean that it's wrong. The level curve in Generation 2 is kind of ridiculous on a bunch of different levels. So for those who have not had the pleasure or displeasure, depending on how you think of it, of playing a Johto game, most wild Pokemon, no matter what area you are in the game, range between levels 8 and 11. It's kind of absurd. This means that if you want to sort of like train your Pokemon on wild Pokemon, you're going to be grinding for a long time. Let alone if you catch someone new to add to your team, anytime after the first or second gym, they're going to start pretty underleveled, so you are going to have to grind for a long time in order to get them up to pace. You could fight trainer battles to try to expedite this process, but a lot of non-boss trainers are also very low level for what you would expect at that point in the game. Now, Johto's level curve overall is very low. Even the champion has relatively lower level Pokemon than you would expect for the champion, you know, compared to champions from other regions, right? I believe Lance's Pokemon are in the 50s, but like low 50s. Let me check real quick. Okay, so it's even worse than I thought. It's even lower than I thought. Lance's Pokemon in Crystal, or Gold, Silver, and Crystal, range from levels 44 to 50, whereas, and that's where he's the champion. Whereas in Red, Blue, and Yellow, it's 58 to 62. And that's where he's only the 4th member of the Elite Four. So, in general, the level curve of Johto skews much lower, which isn't, like, necessarily a bad thing. It is a creative decision that I'm not a huge fan of, because it means you don't get a lot of your Pokemon to evolve. But it was, I at least assume, made with the post-game in mind, because this has arguably the most robust post-game, just because it has an entire other region. You go back and explore Kanto, which is pretty neat, to be able to, like, oh, holy shit, right over the water in our backyard is where Generation 1 took place. When I played this as a small baby child, I definitely reacted like that. Like, I was excited, right? But the post-game of Pokemon, of Gen 2, right, is actually pretty shallow, because in addition to the level curve being a problem in Johto, it continues to be an issue in Kanto. Most trainers in Kanto are ridiculously underleveled, as are wild Pokemon. They're not going to be to the same extent as in Johto, or I guess arguably they are to a greater extent because your team is probably higher level. But they're not going to be as low level as the typical wild Pokemon in Johto. But still, in Kanto, like, wild Pokemon are in levels, like, 20, and this is after you beat the champion. So it kind of feels like a glorified boss rush, where the only like, trainers that feel even moderately challenging are Red and Blue, who you can only access after you defeat the other 7 gym leaders. And the gym leaders are, like, they at least have full teams of Pokemon, but their Pokemon are absurdly underleveled. Janine, for example, has Pokemon lower level than the Elite Four, but you can only access her after the Elite Four. Random trainers will have, like, level 20, 30 Pokemon, not fully evolved Pokemon. It's just, this is the problem that is also in the non-post game. Like, you fight a bunch of rocket people, in the Rocket Underground when you have Lance, like, investigating the Red Gyarados, right? And they'll have Pokemon who are, like, level 18, despite the fact that you need Surf to get there, which means you have to have defeated Morty, who has higher level Pokemon than that. I know some people attribute all of the issues with the Gen 2 level curve to the fact that it has sort of, like, the branching paths. After you beat Morty, you can either go left and fight Jasmine, or go right and investigate the rocket stuff. But I don't think that's the root of the problem. I think just random trainers and random wild Pokemon are just absurdly low for really no good reason. Yeah, so it makes it hard to gain experience. It makes it so that whoever you add to your team after the first 2 gyms is going to periodically be underleveled for any boss fight. And it makes it so that non-boss fights just feel like busy work. Like the rocket grunts that I mentioned, you're not in any danger from a level 18 Zubat after you've proven that you can beat Morty's team of ghost types. It's just a waste of time. And it makes it frustrating to play through. I feel like I'd rather not engage with Johto. I'm not going to put it super, super low because this was still very early. This was kind of treated like an expansion pack, and so a lot of the issues that it has are a result of that, right? A lot of people will talk about how the Johto original Pokemon, I mean, they all feel really underbaked, but they're not even really available throughout the campaign. It's hard to find too many of them early. There's like Hoot Hoot, Sentret, and Mareep are available before the first gym. But like the first gym uses Pidgey and Pidgeotto, which I do think is a problem. I think it's a problem that's sometimes a little bit exaggerated. Like, for example, I'm actually a fan of Bugsy having Scyther as his ace, because Scyther was like a really cool Gen 1 Pokemon who's like exclusive to the Safari Zone and like feels rare and like an accomplishment if you find it. And so having this boss have this Pokemon that people go in knowing is rare and is exciting is like, ooh, that's kind of cool. A lot of the dark types being exclusive to Kanto. While I do find that frustrating, I think that it falls under the same thing I was saying with like poison type here, where they're meant to be enemies. Like, they're dark is evil, right? Like, they're associated. I think in Japan it's called the evil type. They're associated with the bad guys. So like, Houndoom only being accessible in the post game. I think it's so that the various rocket bosses you fight, who all have Houndour, Houndoom, and whatnot, like, it feels exclusive to them. Not unlike how in later generations, for example, in Gen 7, right? Type Null feels exclusive to Gladion. So I don't hate that decision. And there are some Gen 2 Pokemon who are like boss trainers aces and feel sort of notorious for that reason. Miltank is the big one who comes to mind, but Steelix, Seadra, or not Seadra, Kingdra, the final evolution. Piloswine, I think, is Bryce's ace. Ice is sort of like a lame type, so it doesn't really stick in your mind, but I guess it counts, kind of. From what I understand, Crystal addresses some of these grievances, but makes others worse. I know it added the runaway mechanic, where wild Pokemon will run away from you, and it also got rid of Mareep. It had a really weird approach to version exclusives, where most of the Gold and Silver exclusives are available in Crystal, but in exchange, some Pokemon that were available in both Gold and Silver just got left out of Crystal. I've heard some people criticize this. The main argument I've heard is that, like, version exclusives are part of a version's identity, and as a result of that, like, they shouldn't be both available in the definitive version. I'll be honest, I think version exclusives are bullshit. They are just an excuse to sell you the same game twice. I know that they're meant to, like, encourage trading or whatever, but there's plenty of other ways to encourage trading. I think that forcing, like, if you want to get the full Pokédex, either your friend has to buy a different version than you, or you buy the same version twice, is, it's bullshit. And I don't know how, like, Pokemon has been getting away with this and will continue to get away with this for forever. Like, Pokemon fans demand better. Anyway, I haven't played Crystal, so it goes in not played. It probably would rank around the same place as Gold and Silver, because I know that the main issues I have, that being, like, the level curve and the fact that, it just feels like there's a lot of busy work, both in the main campaign and in the post-game, don't really get addressed by Crystal. It adds a Suicune story, which gets reprised in Heart Gold, Soul Silver, but yeah, haven't played it, so not ranking it. Alright, moving on to Generation 3, Ruby and Sapphire are where we started. And a bit of history for me, I did not play this generation when it first came out. This was one that I skipped. I believe I delved into it a little bit, and then just sort of like fell off of it, decided I was too old for Pokemon, and didn't actually come back to it until just 2 years ago, when I played it for the first time. I think I started with Emerald, and I played Ruby and Sapphire afterwards, and so some of my feelings towards Ruby and Sapphire are probably a little bit unfairly negative, because I got to experience, in my opinion, the peak of Gen 3 before them, and they do feel significantly like lesser versions. This is sort of where the formula of Pokemon finally got solidified. You know, Gen 2 kind of was an expansion pack of Gen 1, and then Gen 3 built off of the foundation that Gen 1 laid down and sort of put a bunch of other tropes into place. The legends being a big part of the story, being something that you encounter during the evil team plotline, started here and never went away. Like, that's just what happens in every single game afterwards. And it was novel for the time. I don't want to hold it against the games, because it was actually something new that they invented. But a lot of other elements of Gen 3, especially in the Ruby and Sapphire version, did not age particularly well. A lot of the gyms are kind of boring. You know, look at Tate and Liza. They're supposed to be showing off dual battles, and they just have 2 Pokemon. Especially having played through Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and a lot of its issues being the things that it took from Ruby and Sapphire as opposed to from Emerald, really makes me feel more negatively towards Ruby and Sapphire than I probably should. I think that they do quite a few things right. I like a lot of the new Pokemon designs. I do like the Weather Wars, especially having learned the sort of real-life, real-world influence for them. I think it's kind of cool. I do think it's lame that you only fight either Team Aqua or Team Magma in Ruby and Sapphire. I know the counter-argument to that is that neither team feels fully fleshed out in Emerald. And I would agree that, like, the sub-bosses don't feel fleshed out, but Archie and Maxie do, and they're the important ones. Like, I don't care about the whoever their name are, like, Taylor and Matt or whatever. Like, Aqua Boss Matt was never the big part of Aqua. Like, it's Archie and Maxie. Yeah, I think the other thing is, I know that 7 out of 10 Too Much Water is a meme, but what that complaint was getting at was twofold. One, the type chart is very unbalanced in especially the original Hoenn decks. There's a ton of water types and not a lot of good non-water types, both in terms of enemy trainers and the ones you can catch yourself. Like, there's a reason that Swampert is sort of the king of Gen 3, and it's because there's almost no threatening grass types on any mandatory or even optional fights. Like, oh, Tropius, oh no, what will I ever do against the god gamer that is Tropius? Yeah, it makes water feel a bit too dominant. Even, like, so Watson is one of the scariest gym leaders, right? But outside of him, how many electric types are there, or even Pokemon that have electric coverage? None really come to mind. Like, water is just already one of the best types out there, and this game kinda doesn't do much to fight back against the water allegations. Also, I think that the abundance of water routes, it was a cool thing for them to try, and it makes Hoenn stand out as a region that has its own regional identity, where the entire eastern half is like a bunch of water. But you run into two problems with water routes. One is that it's very easy to get lost. There's not a lot of landmarks, and navigating the water routes to get to the destination you want is, to me at least, not fun. You gotta just keep lathering on repels, because this is before the repel quality of life, and surfing around and trying to find where you're going. And that's before you add in the abundance of water HMs, making it so that you basically need a water HM butler on your team, or have your water type just like saddled with dive and surf and waterfall. Thankfully, you don't need whirlpool in this generation. Can you imagine? But then also, diving is not particularly fun, and also they didn't really take good use of it. I was talking to someone the other day, and she mentioned that there's only one deep sea Pokemon in all of Pokemon, and it's Chinchou, who originated in Gen 2. They didn't even really take advantage of diving and the fact that diving is like mandatory for the story to introduce new deep sea Pokemon, which is a shame because like there's some scary, freaky deep sea designs they could have come up with. And dive itself is an HM that, the fact that you need to like find the correct dive spot in order to get to both the Aqua Hideout, well I guess that's an Emerald, no, Undersea Cavern. Undersea Cavern is in Ruby Sapphire, yeah, so I can blame them for that. And also the Volcano Town. I don't know, maybe it's just a me problem, but I find myself being like, is this the right dive spot? No, it's not. Is this the right dive spot? No, it's not. Over and over and over. There are a lot of fundamentals that I like about Gen 3, but I think because I can get them in Emerald, I'd rather not play Ruby and Sapphire. In most situations, they have all of the flaws that Emerald has, and then some more of their own. Specifically, like, I really do think the gyms are just so bad. They're so bad. And then we move on to the first remake. So this was Gen 1 with Gen 3 mechanics. It fixes a lot of the Gen 1 glitches, which I understand, but I personally like a lot of the glitches. But the bigger issue that I have, and this will sort of go on to sort of the way that I'm approaching remakes in terms of ranking them, is I hold remakes more accountable for the issues that they don't fix than I necessarily would the original game. And the reason for that is oftentimes there's going to be issues that slip through the cracks that when you have a second opportunity to address them and either choose not to or just like don't for whatever other reason, to me that speaks ill of the remake. Like, what is the point of the remake if it still has most of the issues of the original? Or in some situations, even more issues than the original. This is unrelated to Pokemon, but I recently, because it was available on PlayStation Plus, and I have PlayStation Plus, so it was basically free to me, I played the remake of Destroy All Humans 2, which was, it's a problematic game, whatever. And it was a game I have like childhood memories of, and the remake apparently just added a bunch of game-breaking glitches. And to me, it's like, why would you ever play a remake that is just worse than its original? I know Silent Hill 2 is a big one with this, where it has issues that make it worse than the original. And the reason I'm bringing up these examples is I think that Fire Red and Leaf Green are a strict downgrade over the original. And not because they fixed the glitches. I understand fixing glitches. But because of their weird adherence to being the most faithful remakes possible. We'll run into this problem with others. They really, really wanted to only have the original 151. Which, fine, whatever. That's your prerogative. But why then do Pokemon who have later evolutions added in later instances still try to evolve? If you have a Golbat on your team, every time it levels up, if you have max friendship, it will try to evolve into Crobat. And then it will stop, and it'll play the animation every single time, which is so stupid. Eevee, I believe it tries to evolve into Espeon. Fact check me if I'm wrong about this. Because it's always daytime in Fire Red Leaf Green. There are day-night dependent Pokemon, but apparently there's no nighttime in Johto or Kanto. Johto has day-night, but Kanto does not. It leaves out features that had been added from like breeding and whatnot. So if you catch a Kanto Pokemon and want to breed it, you have to transfer it to other games. Which is where we run into the other significant downgrade. The way that I would say it is strictly worse from Gen 1. Trading is locked in so many weird, arbitrary ways. So I'm not a big trading fan when it comes to Pokemon, so I might be getting some of these details wrong. But I believe in order to trade with a version that is not Fire Red and Leaf Green, you need to get the National Dex, which involves completing the Regional Dex, beat the game, and beat the Sevi Islands side quest, where you get a big Ruby or a big Sapphire, depending on your version, and you can only trade with either Ruby or Sapphire. So like now it's version exclusive trading. I believe there's also an issue where if you've unlocked the National Dex, but someone else hasn't, you can't trade with them. There's so many weird, like, arbitrary restrictions that seemingly were just there to make it more difficult to complete the National Dex, because Gen 3 had, like, the mini Dexit, where you can't transfer from Gen 1, Gen 2 to Gen 3 just because of limitations between the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance. I don't blame Game Freak for that. That's a technological limitation that you can't work around. That's fine. And we didn't have, like, Pokemon Home type deal that would get around all of those issues because you didn't have Wi-Fi on the Game Boy Advance. I get it. I don't think that's a problem. I think the problem is when you arbitrarily limit all of the other forms of trading and lock them behind, let's be frank, the worst added content. Like, Saphire Island sucks so much ass. It's just kind of like, why are you adding all of these restrictions? Why are you stopping Pokemon from evolving? Why are you, but still having them do the evolution animation? Why are you adding all of these issues that didn't need to be an issue? This will probably upset people, especially considering my Gen 1 bias puts red and blue so far up here, but like Fire Red and Leaf Green are, I'm not gonna say objectively because they're not objective. Like none of this is objective. These are my rankings. But I do think that they are a almost entirely strictly worse version of Red and Blue. The only thing that stops them from being strictly worse is it includes held items and it includes abilities, which are very cool additions. But I don't think that's enough to offset all of both the bullshit I don't like that affects me and the bullshit that doesn't affect me. Yeah, it's just so dumb. It's just so dumb and weird and bad. Speaking of bad, this is another one people are going to be very upset at me for, probably. I did not finish Pokemon Colosseum because I was not having fun. I made it to, I got all 3 legendary dogs. I made it to after you get the 3rd legendary dog, right? And even then, like, after the first one, I think the first one's Entei. After Entei, I got so sick of the shadow catching mechanic stuff that I used Pika Hicks to give myself infinite Master Balls. Because I'm really not a fan of catching Pokemon. In my first playthrough of games, I will engage with them without infinite Master Balls, usually. But Colosseum was so frustrating that I just stopped. Okay, so the upside. Let's talk about the positives first. I do think that double battling is generally more fun than single battling. And so a game with all double battles is awesome. They tried to like dark and edgy with it, which I don't necessarily think is a positive or a negative. It's just a flavor direction. It's not one that like I liked super much, but I'm also not going to be like, I don't know, I'm not going to be super angry at it. I do think that, like, the idea of stealing the Shadow Pokemon is kind of cool, and from what I understand, I haven't played XD. I guess I'll put that in have not played. From what I understand, XD is kind of just, like, a strictly better version of Colosseum, and I will probably play it sometime, because I do like double battles. But, oh my god, Colosseum frustrates me on so many levels. So first off, just the battling itself. Incredibly slow. The animations are some of the slowest some of the slowest in the series, and there's oftentimes lag in between you putting in commands and the Pokemon, like, the round carrying out, right? Which is frustrating when there are so many just filler battles. The sort of thing that I described with Johto, right? Where the opponent just have either underleveled or very weak Pokemon, and so it's not too much of a challenge, especially since, like, the AI is completely random. And so it leads to these situations where the iconic text is that doesn't affect Mischievous, because the random AI will frequently spam normal moves into your ghost type because so many opponent Pokemon only have normal moves. This is just, it's just not full of fun battles. It's not a fun battle system, which is a shame because I love double battles, but this is just not a fun battle system. Random AI is inherently unfun to play against, in my opinion, just because you're not really strategizing against them so much as just sort of clicking super effective move and hoping that you get lucky with their choices, right? You can make some amount of strategy, like switching around and stuff, but if they have coverage moves, you can just get unlucky when you make the correct switch and then they accidentally read you and yeah, it's stupid. I'm not huge into random AI. The Pokemon that you get are generally extremely weak. This was another consequence of like the Gen 3 Dex stuff. You get a ton of Johto Pokemon because they weren't available in Hoenn or Kanto. So the best way for them to have you be able to transfer the Johto Pokemon to complete your national Dex is through Colosseum. Johto Pokemon are kind of bad. Like, a lot of them are super undercooked. Many of them would get evolutions in Gen 4 because they were so weak. So you end up having a bunch of weak Pokemon, which can be an interesting choice, force you to come up with strategies with weak Pokemon. But against random AI, any amount of strategic stuff that you do is generally wasted because they're just clicking random moves. And so oftentimes, like, trying to find a way to beat a traditional Pokemon game with weaker Pokemon can be interesting because you're like, oh, I know what the AI is going to do. I can plan my strategy around that. Whereas here, because the AI is random, you can, to an extent, come up with a strategy to leverage your weaker Pokemon, but in general, it just kind of feels like you're brute forcing either the AI or the levels. The level curve is kind of the opposite of Johto, in that it is extremely, extremely steep. But this just results in not quite forced, but basically forced grinding. I know you can beat it without any grinding because people have beaten it in 0 EXP or with all Shadow Pokemon who don't gain EXP. And here's the thing about that. Should I talk about the Shadow system? No, I'll talk about the level curve first. Yes, you can. That doesn't mean it's going to be a pleasant experience to do it without grinding. And it's also not a pleasant experience to do it with grinding. The enemy teams will generally be a much higher level than you if you don't grind. And you just sort of feel like you're at a disadvantage for that reason, especially as you get later into the story, which is part of why I dropped it, because I was like, I don't really feel like grinding. I don't really feel like I'm not having enough fun to like hack in rare candies. I just dropped it. I wasn't having fun. Just a lot of fluff battles, really steep level curve. And then we want to talk about grinding. The Shadow Pokemon themselves require their own form of grinding because you need to maximize their friendship or break their Shadow Hold or whatever it's called, which is... There are different ways to do it, but typically, from what I've seen online, the most quote-unquote efficient way to do it is to just run around a bunch, and the later you get into the game, the more running around you have to do. And your Pokemon can't grow until then. They'll never level up until you unshadowize them. They won't learn new moves until you, to a certain degree, unshadowize them. And even once that, like, they're stuck with still the original 3 plus Shadow Rush. It's a bunch of unnecessary and tedious stuff in between a battle system that is both unenjoyable and slow. I think this goes in D tier. I think below Fire Red, Leaf Green. Okay, I guess if we're ordering these, I didn't really think about ordering the tiers, but if we're ordering them, that's the order the tiers are in so far. I know Colosseum is a beloved game, and like, if you have a ton of nostalgia for it, or you just like it despite like not having nostalgia, that's fine and valid. People play Pokemon for different reasons, but for me, everything that Colosseum has goes counter to my ability to enjoy the game. But I've been negative for, I think, too long. Emerald still has some of the flaws of Hoenn, dive, oceans, all that stuff. It's got some issues. However, despite those issues, I still think it is one of my favorite Pokemon games to just go back and play. The gyms are more challenging than the Ruby and Sapphire version, and I think that is enough to push it from C tier to A tier, because some amount of what's dragging Ruby and Sapphire down is just that the enjoyable parts of them, because there are enjoyable parts of them, are also found in Emerald, which has fewer of the unenjoyable parts. Not none of the unenjoyable parts, but fewer of the unenjoyable parts, to me. Emerald does add the Magma Hideout, which makes the evil team take a little bit longer, and the evil team is, in my opinion, almost always the worst part of any Pokemon game. So that is like a tiny knock against it, and it's annoying to navigate the Magma Cavern. But it's still just like, to me, not enough to knock it out of A tier. I think I prefer it over Yellow. Yeah, I think I'm gonna put it up here. Basically everything I have to say about Emerald I said in the Ruby and Sapphire section, but the gyms are harder, and the Pokemon that you encounter, there's a wider variety of them, and I like the story including both Aqua and Magma. I think that then you don't run into silly situations like, why does Team Magma have their base underwater? That doesn't make any sense. Why does Team Aqua, like, the Sapphire version of Volcano is like, Team Magma and Ruby is like, we have an evil plan. We are going to force the volcano to erupt, so there will be more landmass. And you're like, no, I need to stop you, because volcano erupting would be bad. And then Aqua's like, we have an evil plan. We will force the volcano to not erupt, because if it erupted, it would get rid of the sea. And you have to go, no, I need to stop you. We need to let the volcano erupt, because it would kill people. Like, it's just silly. It's just silly. I like them instead matching each set piece to the evil team that it more closely corresponds to. You know, Aqua's trying to steal the submarine for like water exploration and stuff. Magma is having the volcano erupt because it's literally in their name. The Weather Institute, like, you know, just have them match up where they need to match up, right? I don't think that's bad. All right, moving on to Generation 4. Diamond and Pearl are in a similar boat to Ruby and Sapphire in that they are almost strictly worse than their third version, Platinum. This was the time in which Pokemon did end up having, like, definitive versions that came out. I know a lot of people say that Yellow is the definitive version of Red and Blue, but it was really aiming for something different. Whereas both Emerald and Platinum were looked at as kind of fixes for what are pretty big flaws in the original versions of the games. So the first Sinnoh game had a notoriously bad regional dex. A lot of things are memed on, like, oh, what fire type are you going to use? Ponyta or Infernape? Or the idea that every Sinnoh playthrough has, like, the same 4 Pokemon because Shinx, Bidoof, Staraptor, and part of that is because the Sinnoh dex is really, really scant. Both in terms of, like, it has a small number of Pokemon, but also your early options, which I find that often early game Pokemon form the majority of your team just because you have enough time to get used to them, right? And you sort of like form what the core is going to be. A lot of your early options were either really bad or really rare, because the Honey Tree system hid things like Heracross and Munchlax that you technically could get early behind not only a time check and that you have to like wait 6 hours for honey to be available, but also a pretty ridiculous RNG check. Most of the time, your Honey Tree Pokemon is going to be like Wurmple, or Burmy. I know you can get Cherubi, but Cherubi's like both not a very good Pokemon and also like, I think it was rarer than Burmy and Wurmple. You get Apom, but that's a very rare one. And obviously Munchlax and Heracross are very rare. But other than that, you've got the same like 5 or 6 Pokemon on almost every grass route, at least for the first half of the game. And I say at least for the first half of the game, but even once you start getting into the later game, like, it adds a few more. But Diamond and Pearl's dex was really, really limited, really limited. A lot of Pokemon you just don't get access to until super late. I know that there's like the Gabite you can get really early, or I think it's a Gible actually you can get very early after the second gym, but you have to like know about the secret cave that's like the entrance is hidden under the highway. I don't think that, and it's one Pokemon too. I don't think that helps with the type variety allegations. But The other half of a lot of teams have looking the same is the insane amount of HMs. This is the biggest example of HM bloat. Eventually we would get to the point where there are no HMs, but I think after Generation 4, HMs are much, much less of a problem. Gen 5 and Gen 6 have 1 and 2 mandatory HMs respectively, and they're few and far between how many times you need to use them, right? Or I think Gen 6 has 3. You need strength as well, but they're few and far between. Whereas in Gen 4, you need Cut, Rock Smash, Rock Climb, which, God, Rock Climb. Talk about an unnecessary addition in terms of HMs. And a weirdly small number of Pokemon can learn it, too. So you have, like, in order to get to the final confrontation with Team Plasma, you need to have someone who has Rock Climb, which, like, limits the Pokemon you can use, because you're either one down for the final confrontation with the evil team, or not Plasma, Galactic. Or you just have to have one of the Rock Climb Pokemon, and its moveset has to be compromised to an extent. You need Strength, you need Surf, you need Waterfall, so again, we're doubling up on water stuff. You don't need Defog, but, like, you kind of do, because the Fog route, if you don't have Defog, all of your moves have 60% accuracy, or more accurately, minus 40% accuracy. So if you don't have a 100% accurate move, then it's even worse. God, the HM bloat in Sinnoh is so bad. Not only that, but there's a lot of very, very slow things both in and out of battle. The Deep Snow and Great Marsh routes have the periods where you just sort of, you fall in, and hashtag just deal with it, I guess. Health bars in Gen 4 are incredibly, incredibly slow. I think Diamond and Pearl are pretty fucking bad. I'm gonna put them in D tier below Fire Red and Leaf Green, but above Colosseum. I think they're kind of awful. There's also a bunch of unnecessary, weird backtracking. The entire period in between Gyms 3 and 4, which are the same level, and Gym 5, where you, like, run back, do the Psyduck stuff, go to Cynthia's hometown, and then you have to go to, Fantina. It's just, like, a mess. It's just kind of a mess. But a lot of these issues, not all of them, but a lot of these issues were solved in Platinum. The Dex was expanded. I would say not enough, but it's better. The HM bloat was not addressed. And the backtracking is still present. There's a little bit less of it. Fantina being the third gym definitely helps a bit, but you do still have to, like, go out of your way to get strength, go out of your way to get, defog. You have to, like, go through the whole area to Cynthia's grandmother just to fight Cyrus. The Distortion World is really cool, but also really slow, takes a lot of time. And there's kind of not anything going on after your first playthrough. Like, I do think it's really cool for your first playthrough, but then it's just, like, a slow walk through, very easy puzzle. I'd say that it fixes enough. I would say it's still kind of fun, but the limited dex, the slow health bars, the backtracking, Distortion World kind of sucking, just feel like a lot of there's a lot of to it. HM bloat is so bad in Gen 4. Yeah, HM bloat is very bad, to the point it fucking affected Heart Gold Soul Silver. Like, it leaked into these remakes. I think this is the worst remake. There's a weird narrative that's just sort of, like, accepted amongst the Pokemon community that Heart Gold Soul Silver is the peak of what Pokemon remakes should look like. And I disagree on, like, very fundamental levels. So it does, not to the same degree as Fire Red, but it does some amount of the This Must Be Faithful remake, in that it doesn't address what I would consider to be the core issues of Gold and Silver. The level curve is arguably worse in HGSS, in that you fight tough bosses, and then you have almost every wild and trainer Pokemon in between super low leveled, kind of just like a time waste. Like, the the rocket, like I said before, like the rocket fight that the rocket hideout that you go through after having beaten Morty with level 18 Pokemon, is just a waste of time. Yeah, I don't care for really anything in the campaign of Heart Gold, Soul Silver. The post-game is slightly improved. Blue's team got an overhaul, and so it's even harder than it was in Gold and Silver. And Janine got some higher levels. I think some of the others did as well, but it still just feels like a boss rush. Red has an even higher level. I didn't mention this in Gold and Silver, but Red is like the biggest jump in terms of like level spike. So you're either hacking in rare candies, spending a long time grinding against wild Pokemon, or fighting him underleveled. And the fact that Red's Pokemon are even higher level in Heart Gold, Soul Silver is why I would say the level curve is arguably worse. I will say the positive, and this is, I think, what people are referring to when they say this is the best remake. Following Pokemon are fucking adorable. I love following Pokemon. They're great. And this is probably the game that did it second best. We'll get to the one that I think did it best, but this did it. Not only did this originate the concept, I mean, technically, Diamond and Pearl did with, like, Amity Park, but this is the game that originated it in terms of, like, actually being able to do it outside of Amity Park, right? This was the only one that had following Pokemon for a while. They didn't come back until Let's Go, and it did it really, really well. It's also the only one that had them with the 2D sprites, which, in my opinion, are better than the 3D models in most instances. I really like the 2D sprites, so I get why people have affection for them. But it adds even more fluff. Like, the Rocket plotlines are still filler, still annoying, they just take longer. We now have Ethan or Lyra slowing you down at various points. It's just not good. And to make things worse, right? It inherited Generation 4's HM bloat. Fucking Rock Climb is not only in the game, but a mandatory HM to reach Red. So you need to have someone who can use Rock Climb, for a move that for some reason so few Pokemon can use. Like, there's so many Pokemon who just can't learn Rock Climb. And it's not a good move. Like, it's just a normal type move with a chance to confuse. You need a Rock Climb user to reach Red, which is supposed to be the pinnacle, penultimate, fucking endgame, postgame, bullshitty fight. God, Heart Gold, Soul Silver are so bad. I think I'd rather play them than Coliseum, but I fucking hate Heart Gold, Soul Silver. Like, so, they just don't feel good to play. They really don't feel good to play. Like, they don't address the issues inherent to the Johto region, and they come with their own Gen 4 issues. The Gen 4 health bars are also present in Heart Gold, Soul Silver. Sprout Tower is now mandatory for some reason. It's just like a bunch of unnecessary fluff. I don't know why. Again, you're allowed to like these, right? Like, you're allowed to have a different opinion than me. I don't know why the narrative of these being, like, peak remake is a thing. I genuinely think they are the worst remake. Well, I mean, this exists, but thankfully, it would go here. But I haven't played these garbage games. So you're saved from being the worst remake. Congratulations. Sinnoh not only cursed you with HMs, but it saved you from the title of worst remake. And then we move on to Generation 5. I am a unapologetic fangirl of Generation 5. I think I prefer the originals to Black and White 2. No, actually, Black and White 2, I think I prefer Black and White 2. I'm ranking them both at the same time, and I'll sort of gush about them both, because I think Unova is... I love Unova. I love the Unova games. So I think it was a very bold decision for Game Freak to do the second mini Dexit and have no non-Unovan Pokemon native, at least in the first game. They get added in the sequel, and force you to, unless you use trades to get around it, go through the game entirely with new Pokemon. In a lot of ways, Gen 5 is kind of a soft reboot. A lot of Pokemon parallel Pokemon from the original games. You look at Buffalont, that's like Unovan Tauros. A lot of them feel like regional variants before we had regional variants, and I'll be honest, I like that approach better than just being like, this is Paldean Tauros, it's just Tauros with a different color fur. This is a lowland Rattata, it's standing on 2 legs and has a mustache now. Like, I prefer being like, we're in the same design space as we were with Grimer. But what if instead of a pile of sludge, it was a garbage bag? And it was cute. And then when it evolved, it got too big and it burst out of its garbage bag, and now the garbage bag is kind of like just a tank top, basically. And it's bursting out of it, and it's got pigtails. It's not like a tank top, it's like a mask. And it's got pigtails of garbage coming out, right? Like that sort of thing, as opposed to Grimer and Muck, which are slime, bigger slime, right? What if instead of a bull, it was a buffalo? What if instead of Abracadabra Alakazam having like the spoons and stuff, they were a weird fetus that had like DNA cell dividing stuff? And I think that's a cool approach to like playing in the same play space, right? You can see, the rock type you have to trade to evolve. It's Gigalith is like Golem. The fighting type you have to trade to evolve Conkeldurr is like Machamp. They fill in the same space. A lot of them parallel in cool ways. But I think their design, having 5 generations of experience designing these Pokemon, I think their designs are generally better than the Gen 1 ones. The Gen 1 ones, some of them are iconic, and some of them are very good. But they're also, it was their first crack at it, right? There's gonna be some flops. The one thing I don't like is I think the Unovan starters in general are pretty weak design-wise, but I am a huge defender of most, not Behem and Elgium, but most of the controversial Gen 5 designs. A lot of the object mons of Gen 5 and the later generations get criticized, and I think unfairly so. There have always been object mons, and I know the response to that is, oh, well, I don't like the object mons in earlier generations, which some people don't. And it's fair if you don't like the object mons. I don't think there's a problem with object mons. The idea that they, like, lack creativity because they're just an object, when there are Pokemon who are just a Pokemon, like, just an animal, right? Like, Growlithe is like, what if a dog was fiery? Vanillite is what if an ice cream cone had magic ice powers. So I don't think that one of them is more complex than the other. Object plus element or animal plus element, equal levels of stretch in your brain cells. And the real magic comes in the way that design is sort of like turned into a sprite, given personality through that. So that is my side tangent spiel about how much I'm a defender of the object mons for the most part. That being said, Gen 5, forcing you to use all of the new Pokemon, really cool gimmick. There's a little bit of excess, especially in Black and White, with the rival fights, which kind of don't vary up much, other than N if he counts as a rival. But the Evil Team storyline was genuinely pretty compelling. They kind of dropped it at the end, because they were like, surprise, this compelling story we were trying to telling, it was all a lie. It was all a lie, and Ghetsis is actually just straight up evil, and I think that's stupid. But the addition of hidden abilities, the cool new held items, even if some of them, like gems, were so fucking broken that they had to be banned in competitive. a lot of the, granted, some of my nostalgia is definitely because when I was in college, I did run after run after run of Blaze Black, which was my first ROM hack. But I also think that the gym designs in Black and White, and especially Black and White 2, had more thought put into them. You know, like Lenora is a normal type specialist, but she uses Retaliate, which is the normal type move that deals extra damage if you knocked out a Pokemon last turn, right? It deals actually an insane amount of extra damage, double damage. So that's, or double power, not double damage. It's not the same thing, but like that sort of thing. Obviously, we get challenge mode in Black and White 2, where there's some, not competitive level, but everyone having items, everyone having good movesets, extra Pokemon. There's a pretty well-known glitch where challenge mode ups the enemy's level, but not their stats, which has led to some people saying, like, challenge mode is actually easier than normal mode. That's a crock of baloney. Having an extra Pokemon and having items and having better movesets and smarter AI is a much bigger benefit, and then, like, the stats remaining the same. You could make the argument that if you're playing with level caps, so you get some new evolutions, then that can, like, in niche situations, make certain gyms easier or whatever. But I think that for the most part, if we're just talking in terms of vanilla playthroughs, challenge mode's gonna be harder. Of course, Pokemon being Pokemon, they had to lock hard mode and easy mode behind clearing the game. The key system is really dumb. I will not defend the key system. But other than that, these games basically got rid of HMs. The only HM you ever need to use in Black 1 is Cut, and you use it once immediately after the first gym and never again. All the other times that use HMs is just for optional secrets, and I actually kind of like that approach to HMs. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad that we eventually got rid of them, but if HMs were ever to come back and only be for optional secrets, I wouldn't hate that. I wouldn't like it. I think it's better if they just don't exist. I don't like having to alter my Pokemon's movesets or have like a HM butler, HM friend, whatever you want to call them, hanging around with you. But yeah, I don't mind that you only have to use it once. Like, there's just so many good features of Unova. It's also just, like, weirdly one of the most fleshed out regions, despite the fact that we've only had 2 games in there. Part of this is because with Black and White 2 being a sequel game, we got to see what happens after the main story, which we only ever got in the post-game of the Johto games for Kanto. We see, like, Kanto 3 years later, whereas here we get to see Unova 3 years later. But in addition to that, there's so many weird, quirky details. Like, did you know that there's a Unovan Zodiac? And each month, each Zodiac has a Zodiac sign that is a Pokemon? I think that's really neat, and you only ever find out about that through the TV, like if you interact with the TV. Unova does also have, it has the contests, I guess, or not contests, the beauty shows, the dress-up shows or whatever, right? I guess I should have talked about Gen 3 and 4. They do have contests. I don't really care for those. For people who are into them, obviously it's going to be a big selling point, but they're kind of unobtrusive, which is nice. Pokestar Studios is not unobtrusive since you're forced to do at least one per playthrough, and that is annoying, but I actually like Pokestar Studios, so it doesn't annoy me too much. I do think it'd be better if they didn't force you to do it, if it was unobtrusive like the contests, and I get why people don't like them and why that would like drag them down for others, but yeah, Pokestar Studios, I think it's neat. I think it's a neat spin on things, and it led to like some cool, weird, cool Pokemon that you can be like, oh, OMG, like, this is a pair of legs. This is, like, the weird aliens popping up. And that's kind of funny. But yeah, I am an unapologetic Gen 5 lover. These are my favorite games. The S tier is finished, by the way. So, yeah, I won't apologize for my preferences. I know that, like, at this point in sort of the cyclical Pokemon discourse, since Gen 5 is the next gen that hasn't gotten a remake, we've sort of gotten to the point where there's like the people who are saying Gen 5 is the best and every other generation sucks, versus the people who are saying, like, Gen 5 is overrated, OMG, it's so bad. And I'm not gonna say every other generation sucks. I think that each generation offers something different, and even if the thing it offers doesn't appeal to me, it might appeal to someone else. Like, I didn't talk at all about contests, but if you're big on contests, like, that's gonna impact your ratings. You're gonna say that Gens 3 and 4 are huge. If you're big on, like, the Battle Frontier, Emerald's probably your favorite game. Me, I generally really like the main story. Although I will say, Black specifically has a weirdly robust post-game. I think Black has a better post-game than the Johto post-game. And that's because so it's a smaller portion, right? It's just like the eastern part of the map is closed off. And then it gets reversed in Black too, like the western portion of the map is closed off. Or more like the south. There's like a couple of random cities that are closed off into post-game. But the bigger thing is that while it is a boss rush like Johto, the bosses that you want to rush or that you would want to interact with are easier to get to. Like, there's the Elite Four rematches, but there's also Cynthia and Undula Town and your rivals to finish off the story. You don't really have to fight like a bunch of filler fights to get to any of them. You can just sort of like explore and get to the town and whatnot. And I find all of those fights to be more entertaining than fighting through a bunch of lame gym for the leaders in order to get to Red and Blue. But the post-game is not the selling point for me for Black or White, or Black or White 2. It's the main story, and that's what I like the most. And now we move on to Generation 6. And it's kind of funny how we went from the generation that introduced a hard mode and is arguably one of the harder generations to the generation that is often seen as the beginning of the easification of Pokemon. I think some of those allegations are exaggerated. The global EXP share is something that people often cite as like, OMG, they made things so easy. It just made it so that you don't have to grind as much. Removal of grinding is not... technically, it makes things easier, but it's just tedium removal, not difficulty removal. However, a lot of the enemy trainers, especially enemy bosses, are noticeably worse than in prior generations. And that's not to say that in prior generations, everything's like the pinnacle of difficulty. But things like, hey, Tyranno literally only has Petal Dance, and he's supposed to be one of your rivals. Gym leaders having 2 or 3 Pokemon at most. Elite Four members downgraded to only 4 Pokemon instead of 5. Whereas 5 was just sort of the traditional thing. Just not great. The game also hands you a lot of powerful resources for free. The second starter, the Mega Stone for the second starter, Lucario, a bunch of Mega Stones when your opponents don't really get to take advantage of Mega Evolution. Like, Lysander and Diantha are the only 2 trainers with Mega Evolution. Yeah, it's just not great. There's also no post-game, which a lot of people lament, and I get it if you are a big fan of the post-game. I guess technically there's a post-game in the scavenger hunt for Mega Stones, but like, fuck you, that does not count. I'm just not a fan of post-games. I talked about Black and White's post-game being, like, in my opinion, the best one, and that's because there's just not a lot to it, and you just get to the things that you want to get to. X and Y doesn't have any post-game, and, like, that does kind of suck, but Ultimately, X and Y kind of just feel undercooked, kind of like Ruby, Sapphire, and Diamond and Pearl were, but since there was no Pokemon Z, we didn't get the Ultimate version. So if you want to interact with Kalos, which sometimes I do, you kind of have to settle for X and Y. And there are some cool things about Kalos. I like that it introduced the fashion system that got removed in Alpha Sapphire and Omega Ruby. But so for anyone who doesn't know, the reason that it got removed was originally that was just going to be an X and Y thing because France is the fashion capital, so it was like supposed to be a regional gimmick. But people got so upset when it got removed that Game Freak brought it back for Gen 7, which I think is a rare instance of Game Freak actually listening to what the people want. Rollerblading was also really, really cool. Wasn't a fan of the grind rails, but I really like just like rollerblading around a bunch. And The region as a whole feels really diverse. There's a lot of routes where you have whole unique tables. There's a lot of Pokemon that are only available on one route, which, one, makes it so you always feel like you're encountering new Pokemon. And two, for Nuzlocke, means that every run feels different because you get a bunch of different encounters. I think that's one of the things that a lot of ROM hacks add is like full national decks available, and they'll do things like that where it's like so-and-so's available on this route, and it makes the region feel really diverse, and I think that's cool. The story's but like the story in Pokemon has never been the selling point. Even Unova, which has like, in my opinion, the best story of the franchise, it's still not great. It's just like better than Pokemon stories. There is a lot of weird tedium in terms of like the evil team stuff. Feeling like it has weird pacing issues, right? There's a huge gap between the first and second gym. It's full with multiple evil team, or an evil team showdown and some rival showdowns and things that are just like not interesting. And then you do rapid fire gyms before fighting the evil team. You do fight them once in between 4 and 5, but then you just like, they just feel like they have a non-presence for most of the game until you get to the big showdown where you fight Lysander 3 times in a row. I guess I should talk about the fairy type got introduced, which I think is cool, both from a competitive and single-player perspective. Making the type chart slightly more balanced is never bad. And the new Pokemon are all kind of undercooked, especially the new fairy types all kind of suck. But there's a lot of, it leans a lot on older dexes and sort of the national dex in that way, and I think it makes for a very fun experience. I don't have nostalgia for this, because I played this again very recently. I think for the first time a year and a half ago. I played it after Gen 3, like right after Gen 3, and it was actually right after I played Ruby and Sapphire, and it wasn't noticeably easier than Ruby and Sapphire. I think it's still kind of fun. I think there's enough positive there, especially if what you're looking for is not hardcore difficulty, which, let's be honest, you're playing the mainline Pokemon games, you're not really looking for hardcore difficulty. Unless you're talking like Ultra Moon, there's just not, there's not like hardcore difficulty, and that's fine. So this is the most recent Pokemon games that I played, is Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. And, I didn't talk about Mega Evolution for X, did I? I don't really like Mega Evolution. I think it's a lame gimmick. I think that it disproportionately affects some Pokemon and not others. And it by and large, like, it's supposed to be a way for underloved favorites to get a boost, but it by and large feels like it's mostly the rich getting richer. Mewtwo gets 2 megas, Charizard gets 2 megas, the starters get megas, both Kanto and Hoenn. Not Kalos, though, because fuck you. Half of the Pokemon who get megas are already quite good, and then the other ones, like, Kangaskhan, obviously, is the big one, but like Sableye, Mawile get improvements that then go away when Megas get taken away. But also, the designs of Mega Pokemon, I hate the designs of Mega Pokemon. They're awful. Every single Mega Pokemon design just looks like someone handed a 12-year-old a Pokemon, and they were like, okay, now make this thing more badass. And they're like, oh, we add spikes and fangs and make all the pointy parts coming out. And I'm just like, what's the point? It's just like weird, edgy, dumb stuff. And also, there's no point to not Mega Evolve. Like with other gimmicks, like Z-moves and especially Dynamax and Terastallization, there's some amount of strategy of when you fire them off. With Mega Evolution, as long as you only have 1 Mega on your team, which you should, because otherwise it's a waste of the item slot, you're always just like, I'm gonna Mega as soon as I can. With, like, maybe the exception of Pokemon whose abilities change from Mega Evolving, but even then, it's almost always better to have their Mega ability. Like, I can see Gyarados, you being like, I want to keep Intimidate around for whatever reason, but it's almost always better to have the Mega ability. Like, oh, Kangaskhan doesn't want parental bond. That's bullshit. It does. It always wants them. But yeah, Alpha Sapphire, Omega Ruby is kind of just like Ruby and Sapphire in 3D. But adds Mega Evolution, which is kind of cool. Adds the Fairy type, which is kind of cool. It does the baby mode thing where you get fucking Mega Latios or Latias after the 5th gym. And that's hilarious and stupid. You can just not use it if you want. The fact that it builds on Ruby and Sapphire as opposed to building on Emerald is very disappointing to me. There are some changes. Archie and Maxie get Megas, which is cool. I really wish that more enemies would have Megas. Like your rival should get a Mega. In both X and Y and Omega Ruby. I think it's like a better experience than Ruby and Sapphire itself. Like, it is an improvement. It's the only remake that actually feels like an improvement over the game it's remaking. Because it adds Megas, it adds the Primals and stuff. It looks really good in 3D. I actually like how it looks. I like flying around the world on Latios and Latias. I think that's kind of neat. But otherwise, yeah, I'd still rather play Emerald than the remakes. Yeah. And then we move on to Sun and Moon, as well as Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. I'm going to talk about them together, because they're very, very similar. I do think it's, like, kind of trash that they made Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon instead of, like, a third version. But it does kind of function like the Emerald and Platinum, kind of being the quote-unquote definitive version. I think it's generally thought of as better than Sun and Moon. Not to say that Sun and Moon have no merits, but there's a lot of cool additions in how they switch things up. I think I would prefer to play Ultra than not Ultra. These are by far the most difficult Pokemon games in the mainline series. Enemy trainers have EV training, have maxed IVs. Totems are incredibly difficult. Totems being the first, like, shake-up in the Pokemon formula, the sort of, like, gym formula, since the game's inception. And I really wish that they would do more shake-ups like this. Like, for a series focused around evolution, this series' formula does not evolve. But, like, totems are really cool. The idea that you're fighting a super strong Pokemon who gets, like, a stat boost, and eventually the later ones get Omni boosts or double Omni boosts, is really, really neat. And then you have to be, like, you get 2v1'd because they SOS partner. I think that's cool. I think that's much cooler than just a single battle gym battle for every single gym. You do still have those bosses that are single battle fights, but it makes the challenges feel different. You got to approach things differently, and I think that's really neat. Of course, the downside of Pokemon Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, and Sun and Moon is just how long cutscenes are. Things are very wordy. You gotta be mashing for a very long time. The story is not super interesting. There's like a little bit something there with Lily and her abusive mother and that sort of stuff. And it was kind of neat on my first read through. I think they, once again, kind of butcher it. Pokemon's not good at handling abusive parents. They made a similar fumble in Scarlett and Violet. And yeah, I'm not super happy with that, but in general, my biggest issue with the story is just that it's long. It's long and it's a Pokemon story, so there's a lot of stuff that I just don't care about. There's cute moments in it. Like, I like Lily, I like Nebby, I like, there's a scene in Ultra where you're, like, herding Chargebugs, and that's really cute. I really like Ride Pokemon. Both mechanically, I like them better than HMs, because you don't have to, like, worry about having an HM user on your team. But I also think Ride Pokemon are really cute. I like the idea of riding on your Pokemon. It's similar to, they're not your Pokemon, but, riding on a specific Pokemon, right? Like, I think it's really cute. It's similar to the, X and Y has, like, the Skidoo ride and the Ride-on ride and that sort of stuff. And it's similar to that. It's similar to following Pokemon from HGSS in that you get these Pokemon interacting with the world. And I like it. I think it's neat. I think it's cute. I think it's a good way to gate progression. Yeah. In general, the difficulty sometimes feels a little bit overtuned for me. I think the big thing is I don't like the IV-EV system. I think that I'm coming to realize that I don't like IV-EV system. I know that it makes for more like interesting competitive depth, but in terms of in-game, either you get EVs and IVs and you get EVs, obviously IVs are things that like can't be adjusted, but you get EVs and your opponents don't, so you always have an advantage. Or if your opponents have like perfectly EV trained Pokemon, it can feel kind of bullshit. The biggest one that comes to mind is like Necrozma. When I first faced Ultra Necrozma in my first playthrough, I was doing it as a Nuzlocke, but I had Pokemon all to level 60 to match him. And he just outsped and one-shot my entire team, and there was nothing I could do about it. And that was a very feel-bad moment. It feels bad when you do not have EV-trained Pokemon, either because, like, you didn't bother to go grind EV-train them, if you're, like, candy-pilled like me and you're, like, over-candying in order to avoid grinding, or just because, like, you don't know the EV system, and so you didn't specifically seek out, like, Rattata or whoever you need. Feeling like you're just way behind everyone else can be kind of discouraging. And I think I would prefer if there were no EVs. Or at the very least, if like the player doesn't gain EVs, if you want to make someone super challenging by giving them EVs, balance it around the player not having them, if that makes sense. Which I know a lot of ROM hacks do. They'll like disable your ability to gain EVs, and I think that's cool. I think it's a cool option. Still, with all of that being said, I really like Alola. I think it's a cute region. I like most of the new Pokemon. I like the difficulty. For the most part, it hits the spot. And I like the totem fights. I think they are a much-needed breath of fresh air compared to what was getting stale with the gym badges and gym trainers and gym leaders and stuff. I think I'd put Ultra here and non-Ultra here. There's an argument for Emerald over Ultra. I'm currently playing through a Nuzlocke of Ultra Moon right now, though, so I think, like, that is probably influencing my affection, is like, oh yeah, I'm enjoying this. I'm remembering how much fun this is. But there was a wipe also that really made me be like, you know what, I actually don't like EVs. Like, this is sort of reinforcing my dislike of EVs. But yeah, I like the Alola games. I think they're quite good. I just wish that there was a fucking skip cutscene button. God damn. Potentially contentious. I like Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. I like Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. I know that these are baby mode games. It's funny because, like, I didn't talk about how the Alola games have your starter pick the wrong have your rival pick the wrong starter, right? And everyone cites that as, like, OMG baby mode. And, like, it is stupid. I think it's really dumb that your rival picks the starter weak to you. But it's funny that it started in arguably the most difficult games in the series. But, yeah, I get it. Like, Let's Go Pikachu, Let's Go Eevee. Not only is it yet another visit to the Kanto region, but it's real easy. Even giving the gym leaders tougher teams doesn't make them tougher because of things like, oh, you need to pick a grass type to go in here. Oh, you need to catch 50 Pokemon to go in here. And also just how busted Starter Pikachu and Starter Eevee are. And also the candy system. Holy shit, the candy system. The candy system is so stupid. For anyone who doesn't know, the candy system is a boost to your stats, but like your raw stats. And you can get up to 200. It's very stupid. But here's why I don't care about any of that. This is not a game about Pokemon fighting. This is basically just a catching game. Like, it's Pokemon Go in Pokemon on Switch, and I don't mean that as an insult. The focus of Pokemon Go, while I did eventually fall off of it, it's just catching. It's just running around, finding the critters you like, and catching. And Pokemon Let's Go copies that to a T. Sorry about that. I had to take a break because I had a coughing fit. But yeah, this is a game about catching and playing with Pokemon. And the mechanics it adds, like the Pokemon existing in the overworld as opposed to random encounters, the catch chains for shiny hunting, post-game letting you fly around and have like those flying Pokemon, all the millions of legendary birds in the sky, the starters being catchable, all that sort of like very cute stuff, right? The following Pokemon, OMG. So I mentioned in HGSS that it does its second best. That's because this game does it best. And like, it's working at an advantage in that it is using 3D, or it's using only the 150, so its 3D models can be like actually good. They can focus on all 150 of them. But like, they all look good. They all follow in the ways you would expect them to, right? Like, Venusaur jumps around like a frog. You can ride on some of them. Like, if you have Haunter as your follow Pokemon, you ride on Haunter. Some of the flying ones you ride on and fly, and that's how you catch Pokemon that are in the sky, like the legendary birds. If you're surfing, if your follow Pokemon is a water one that you can surf on, you ride on them instead of I think it's generically a Lapras that you would ride on. All these really cute touches. It's not difficult, and it's not supposed to be. And it knows what it wants to be, more importantly. Like, I think it knows that the emphasis is on catching. That's why there's, like, you can only enter this gym if you've caught 50 Pokemon. That's why there's things like that. I think for what this game is seeking to accomplish, it accomplishes it very well. And even though I never finished the campaign, because I got bored with what it had to offer around, like, the 6th gym, I spent a lot of time just sidetracked looking for specific Pokemon that I wanted. I actually did some, like, chain catching and stuff, right? I think that the catch system in this, if you are not off-put by the motion controls or touch controls if you're doing it handheld or whatever, I think it works really well. There is obviously the caveat that the inability to turn off things like the drift or have like a non-motion control system it's inherently ableist. There have been a lot of people with motor disability or their advocates who have spoken up about the fact that like literally not being able to play the game, like, you know, people will say, OMG, literally unplayable because something has like glitches or like some other thing that they find unfun. But this is quite literally unplayable to anyone who has a motor disorder to the point that they can't hold the Switch steady. Because if you're on docked mode, you have to be able to use the motion controls, which someone with a severe motor disorder can't do. And if you are in handheld mode, it senses your drift. It has like the gyro for fine tune, right? And that'll make the aiming, it'll fuck up the aiming, and there's no way to turn it off. So if you have a motor disability in specifically your hands and your hands are shaky or whatever, it does become quite literally unplayable. No exaggeration. Like, I'm not using literally mean to vary. I'm using literally to actually mean the word literally. And I think that's bullshit. And I think that Nintendo needs to stop making motion controls mandatory. Because it is ableist. And if you thought my ranking for Let's Go was contentious, Sword and Shield get a lot of hate. Some of it deserved. I would argue not all of it deserved. So they get hate for being linear, and I think that what is actually meant by that is a lot of the routes just feel like hallways. There's not really any secrets to explore. And that I do think is an actual problem. But the games themselves being linear, I don't really mind that. They do get some hate for being too easy. I think that's undeserved for the most part. Like, the fairy type gym giving you all those free boosts is kind of laughably easy, but for the most part, I feel like this is difficulty on par with other Pokemon games. And that's not to say that, like, it's hard. Like, I don't think it's on the same level as, like, Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon or whatever, but if you think that Sword and Shield is significantly easier than, like, Emerald version. I disagree. I think that there are some hard fights. There are some easy fights. Yes, Hop picks the wrong starter, and that's kind of stupid. But at the same time, like, that affects like 6 fights. It's not a big deal. This has more of that Kalos-approved Gen 1 dick-sucking. Charizard being Leon's ace instead of a Galar Pokemon is so stupid. It's so stupid. Like, why doesn't he have the 3rd starter as the ace? I do kind of like that he keeps the 3rd starter, the unpicked starter, and it's on his team. I think that's cool. And they do that again in Gen 9 with the Professor. I think that's really neat. But I think it's lame that, I think it's stupid and lame that he has Charizard as his ace. Gigantamax, I think, is actually probably the best handled of the generational gimmicks. Because not only can you not use it outside of gym fights, but anytime you can use it, your opponent can use it, right? So it makes these gym fights feel awesome and large scale. And like, yeah, using it because you can, as the player, use it more smartly than the AI, does make those fights easier. Like, I won't deny that. Gym fights, for the most part, are not super hard in Pokemon. Like, they're really not. Pokemon is not a series renowned for its difficulty. And the fact that you can't just, like, Gigantamax to kill random Timmy in his level 3 Rattata, but instead have to reserve it just for the boss fights where they have it, makes it feel like more of even footing. The thing that makes it not even footing is that the player is almost always better than the AI, both in terms of smartness and also just, like, you can overlevel, you can have a better team structure as opposed to a monotype, you know what type you're going into, so you can go in, like, ready to beat them with the type advantage. In general, I think Gigantamax is probably the best generational gimmick, at least from, like, a campaign standpoint. I know that in competitive, it was kind of contentious. I think it's still considered best in competitive, but I might be wrong. It might be Terra now. I'm saying specifically, like, VGC. I know it was banned in fucking singles. But, like, also Terra should have been banned in singles. That's the take. Overall, though, there's things I dislike about the Galar games. I've only done one playthrough, but I am kind of tempted to do another one sometime soon, maybe. There's some cool Pokemon designs. Yeah, I think I'm gonna put it in still kind of fun, probably over Let's Go. This is just sort of like I'll play these, but they're not my default go-to. So yeah, I think that's where that's gonna end up. Okay, next up we have Pokemon Legends Arceus. And much like Pokemon Let's Go, Pikachu, and Eevee, it is trying to accomplish a different thing from mainline Pokemon. Its main focus is on catching. It has those dex logs where you catch multiple from the same Pokemon line and have them accomplish tasks and stuff to fill up parts of the dex. And it has the whole, like, sneaking around, throwing Pokeballs behind their backs, explore the open world with the ride Pokemon. It's neat. It's a neat approach. I'll admit it doesn't really work for me personally. I think part of it is that as cool as it is to see Pokemon wandering around their natural habitat, they don't really do anything. They're just sort of standing there in what feels like a very empty open world. Yeah, a lot of the quests just feel like MMO quests where it's like, hey, I need you to gather a Magikarp or a Bidoof of this particular size. Hey, I want you to catch this particular Pokemon. And that includes the Pokedex ones, which will be like, catch 10 of the same species, kill 10 of the same species. Like, just feels like tasks and not particularly enjoyable ones. And the world is just so empty. I get that part of that is because this is supposed to be ancient Sinnoh, so before civilization, there's only one real town, and then there's like the Diamond Clan and the Pearl Clan and stuff. But it just feels devoid of anything worth discovering or worth doing. I do actually kind of like they're not totem fights, what are they, guardian fights, alpha fights? The Dark Souls ones, where you roll around and you throw little coffins at them and stuff. I think that's kind of neat. I didn't finish this game. I think I unlocked Sneasler was where I dropped it. I just sort of didn't feel encouraged to continue running around catching Pokemon. It's not just the catching that exists in this game. They do still have battling. They overhauled it with a brand new system that initially I thought looked like it had more depth than Pokemon, because it has the turn order is affected by your speed. You get multiple actions if you're like a ton faster, making speed even more important because, you know, it wasn't strong enough already. And then you have like Swift Style and Strong Style to control the speed of the battle as well. And much like with Totems, you can find yourself facing against multiple Pokemon at once, which is cool. But the lack of abilities, the lack of held items, all just kind of ended up making it feel a lot shallower. Status got changed, although status has always been pretty broken in Pokemon. A lot of moves with secondary effects got changed, and it feels like they were oversimplified. No abilities means that there's like... Pokemon's never had the most strategic depth, especially in-game, but no abilities unless you're Regigigas in particular, because fuck you Regigigas, I guess, makes it feel even shallower. It would be cool if you could have multiple Pokemon out at the same time. If anything, it kind of draws attention to, and not in a good way, it draws attention to just how boring singles Pokemon is against the AI. Like 1v1, I do actually like the competitive depth of singles Pokemon, although I do think that doubles is probably better. Don't at me, I like both of them, and I play singles more than doubles. But yeah, there's just no depth when you are doing singles 1v1 versus the AI, because you don't really have to do reads. There's no like mind games and stuff. It just... Why are we still having an RPG where you only have one party member? The introduction portions of RPGs where you only have one party member is typically considered the worst part of those RPGs. It just feels like turn-based RPGs specifically, I mean. I don't know. The Legends battle system felt like it just highlighted the issues with traditional battle system. I'd still probably prefer to do it than Johto, though. Now, the observant viewer may realize that there's only one game left, and I haven't put anything in F tier yet. And it's because it's Scarlet and Violet is the only game that I think belongs in F tier. The tiers are supposed to be, there's a significant gap in how much I enjoy them between each tier. And I really do think Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is that much worse. Both in terms of my enjoyment, and also I labeled it defective products because it is a defective product. I'm gonna start by talking about the glitches, which get a undue amount of attention. I understand to a degree, because glitches are like, they're eye-catching, right? A lot of them can be funny, and they tend to draw attention away from everything else in the game. And I do think there are significant issues with the everything else, but the glitches are, to my mind, just indicative of a company that does not care. I don't know if it's a combination of like the crunch that's put on them by the Pokemon Company International, or just the knowledge that these games will sell like blockbusters anyway, but quality control has gone out the window. There are things like the Pokeballs at the origin point. For anyone that doesn't know, you can see the origin point to the room, something that is almost always invisible. If you scroll around on the menu and pull up images on the menu, either through like looking at your Pokemon party or changing your outfit and stuff, they will show up on the map for a brief, like, I think it's a 2-frame window or something, right? They'll just like show up at the origin point. And the origin point always has a Pokeball that is the ball, whatever ball your lead Pokemon is in. Just chilling there, visible. Things like being able to clip through walls and the floor, and oftentimes those things happening just by accident. The camera default, like in battles, if you battle on a slope, the camera just by default will like go through the floor and show you the ugly void underneath. Everyone has seen probably the player character gets very tall. There's tons of crashes, and I believe the DLC added even more. There's stuttering frame rate issues. The load distance is inexcusably small for a game where the selling point is supposed to be you observe these Pokemon in their natural habitat. It was a problem in Arceus, but to a lesser degree than in Scarlet and Violet, where it's just like, it really highlights how empty the open world is when you can't see things. And like, I don't want to say that these are the only or even the main issue with the Generation 9 games, because the thing is, one, it's possible that there are some people who haven't encountered them. I've seen people say, like, I've gotten 0 crashes, I've gotten 0 frame rate issues, I've gotten 0 glitches, and I find that unlikely, but it's obviously not impossible. But there's also people who are unbothered by it, right? Like, oh, I don't play this for the graphics, I don't play it for the frame rate, I don't play it for the not crashing. But they are indicative of just a lack of care. Like, these are the sort of mistakes that any amount of QA testing would have discovered, and a very small amount of polish could have fixed. It's Bethesda level, right? And Bethesda is a company that often gets a free pass because, haha, the glitches are funny. But, like, the products that they release in any other industry would be recalled for being defective. Because, like, there's so many game-breaking issues. It's just embarrassing. It is embarrassing for the company in charge of the largest multimedia franchise on the planet to have released a product in this state. That is before all of the other decisions that I think are bad. So, they went open world. That's sort of the big gimmick, right? It's an open world Pokemon game. I don't hate open world games, but I hate when games are open world for no reason. Like, one of my favorite series is the Yakuza series, and that is an open world series. It's a small open world, but it is an open world where you run around, you do side quests and side activities, and you fight random Yakuza who show up in the streets and stuff. Like, Yakuza is an open world, but there's incident in the open world. There's stuff to do. You explore and find, like, new restaurants, new quests, new items, the keys for the lockers. In Pokemon, what are you exploring this world for? I guess to find out where the other Pokemon are, but there's not really any Pokemon that are hidden away in secrets. They're just roaming different environments, right? Like, there's no motivation to explore the nooks and crannies. There's no events. There's the needles to get the legendaries, right? You have to pull the stakes up and stuff. I guess that's a thing you could be encouraged to explore for, but it just feels so empty. A lot of people talk about how you can't go inside anymore, and I think that's a symptom of the world just not having a lot of stuff in it, but ultimately I wouldn't be bothered by the fact that you can't go inside buildings if there were stuff to do outside the buildings. But instead, like, every route has a smattering of trainers you could battle if you want. They feel like the Johto Rocket trainers, though. They're all like, I have one Pokemon and it's a squirrel. So they're like kind of whatever. There's some HMs, but they're kind of just like lying out in the open. They're not there because you like explored and looked for secrets. It's the same world building issue that Sword and Shield has, but it's highlighted by the fact that you're just wandering through this big open world. This big empty open world. There's also the fact that, like, it being an open world is like halfway a lie. I've seen some people say that, like, without level scaling, there's no reason for it to be open. And, like, I don't fully agree with that, because a lot of open worlds will have an order in which they expect you to do things. And doing them out of order either isn't possible because it's gated by some reason, or, like, the easier things will be easier because you're over-leveled. The thing is that Scarlet and Violet doesn't directly tell you the intended order, but there absolutely is one. Because coming back and fighting, like, Brassius after you've gotten 4 gym badges and you're over-leveled, because you didn't realize you were supposed to go left and then right, and then left and then right, and zigzag weirdly. Like, what happened to me in my playthrough is I just assumed that the things near each other were the levels that you would want to take on. And so I ended up over-leveled for some stuff and under-leveled for others, because there's no indication of what level you're supposed to be for certain fucking Pokemon. I think level scaling would have solved that issue, but I also don't think it's necessary. It would be an improvement. Like, I would prefer level scaling to not level scaling. But you can make an open world game where there is an intended order, or at least, like, an intended, you do Group A, which is, like, this gym leader, this rocket fight, or star fight, and this Titan, and then you do B, and you can do any of them in order, right? Like, I think Zelda has some like that, like Wind Waker has, like, you do the first 4 temples, and then Temple 5 and 6, I think you can do in either order. I might be wrong about that. There's some Zelda games like that. It might not be Wind Waker, but there's some where it's like, oh, you do with these 2 in whichever order, right? I mean, Generation 2 did that, where you either go left or you go right. And, like, I do think that the level curve is an issue, but I don't think it's because of the fork. The fork could have worked. Gen 1 does that, and I think it works in Gen 1. But yeah, it's just a really empty feeling world. There's also, like, you get to Area 0, right? In the final portion of the game. And you have your friends, Arven, Nimona, and Penny, right? I feel like you don't spend much time with them beforehand. Like, Penny sometimes gives you TMs. Arven shows up to help you against the Titans, and you do have cutscene time with him, I guess. And then Nimona has, like, some fights with you, but you don't really get to know her. She's, like, very one-note. And then you're all together for Area 0, and it feels like it could have been, like, an adventure with you and your 3 friends if they had just devoted, like, half of the game to Area 0, right? Like, I don't know, maybe you do the rival battles, you do the Arven stuff, but that's not, like, as extended as it is. Because as it stands, I don't know these people. Why the fuck do I care about these people? Also, no voice acting. Again, it's just embarrassing for a game with this budget. I know some people say, like, oh, it doesn't need voice acting, but, like, it kind of does. It kind of does. If it's gonna keep including, like, singing portions, or, like, auto-scrolling cutscenes, there's cutscenes that auto-scroll, right? Like, I'm not asking for every line of dialogue from every character to be voice acted, right? I know Fire Emblem does that, but, like, a lot of series will just do, there's voice acting in cutscenes. Like, at least meet me where the 3DS Fire Emblems are, right? Where there's voice acting in the cutscenes, and then if there's the dialogue, they don't voice act it. I don't know. Not that the story matters much anyway, but it is kind of like, you could easily just, like, not be able to read fast enough. I don't know. These games just make me very sad. I like a lot of the Pokemon designs. Garganacl is one of my favorite Pokemon. I like all 3 starter lines. I think this is a very, very good generation for the starters. Every time there's a Pokemon design that I like from Generation 9, I'm just like, I wish this was in a game that I had any amount of enjoyment playing. And, like, this hasn't completely killed my enthusiasm for the franchise, because, like, Sword and Shield was still kind of fun, and, like, Sun and Moon wasn't that long ago. It was 2 generations ago, and they were fucking awesome. But it makes me much, much less optimistic for the future. I know Pokemon has always been a low-quality franchise, and, like, one of the themes in, like, a lot of these is You know, Sword and Shield has issues, but a lot of these are the issues that, like, the earlier games have, right? I guess this has made me think that they're not going to do the small sparks of, like Black and White 2 was an evolution of the formula because it's a sequel rather than just a retelling. Like, Emerald is a retelling of Ruby and Sapphire. Black and White 2 is a follow-up, a sequel. Sun, Moon, Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon are shaking up the formula because totems are meaningfully different from gym leaders. But then, like, the gym challenge, it's not really meaningfully different from gym trainers. The treasure hunt is not meaningfully different. That's the other thing, is, like, the school setting adds nothing. It literally only exists to make it so you can't dress up in fun uniform and, like, fun costumes. To limit your ability to dress up. Because, like, you can never go to class. It's so fucking stupid. The Team Star, the evil team, is evil because of truancy, and your character can just never go to class and it's not a problem. And I'm not saying that, like, they should have required you to go to those classes, because I've been to those classes. They were not fun. But if they wanted to make things a school setting, why is it just a regular Pokemon region where you run around a bunch, right? I don't know, maybe it's because this is the only school game that I've played, but, like, it makes me think of, what if they had done Pokemon like Persona, right? Where, like, instead of exploring the whole world, because you're in the school, you've got a limited number of places to go between. I mean, I think the map kind of has that in the school, but then you just leave the school and it doesn't matter. But if you, like, teleported between rooms and, like, maybe an emphasis on, like, social dynamics or whatever, I don't fucking know. I don't know. I don't know that this generation is savable, but I haven't played the DLC, but I've heard the DLC is, like, just more of the same. And for people who like Gen 9, like, that's good for you. Like, I genuinely mean that's good for you. I don't mean, like, oh, good for you. Like, if you can enjoy this thing, then that is good for you. I'm happy that you can find enjoyment where I can't. I'm happy for you. But I want more out of the series than this. Obviously, I would like something that is functional, which, like, Scarlet and Violet isn't, but even beyond that, like, if there were a patch dropped that fixed every single bug Scarlet and Violet had, I still don't think it would be enough.